I'm your bedtime historian, and I once spent an entire afternoon trying to match the complexion of a 14th century noblewoman using only pantry ingredients. It worked if you define success as looking like a ghost with a sunburn. A pale face wasn't just a fashion statement in medieval Europe. It was proof you never toiled in fields, never sweated by fire, never stepped outside unless carried. For noble women, the ideal complexion was so bloodless, so porcelain pure, it flirted dangerously with the appearance of death. And sometimes that's exactly what it led to. Because the surest way to achieve that deathly glow, lead. Lead white ground into a fine powder, then puffed across cheeks, forehead, chin. Mixed with vinegar or rose water, it created a paste smooth, chalky luminous in candlelight. And toxic. Very, very toxic. Like and subscribe if your skincare routine has ever been less deadly than aristocratic face powder. Let's set the bar low together. While you're here, share something soft and strange in the comments, like your favorite historical era to dream about, or where in the world you're curling up tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're seated at a carved oak vanity in a drafty stone chamber. A lady's maid holds a silver mirror, careful not to smudge the freshly powdered skin. The lead paste is already beginning to dry, cracking faintly around your lips as you smile at nothing in particular. Above you, a tapestry flaps gently in the breeze from a tiny window slit. This powder made from ceruse, a blend of white lead and vinegar, was prized for its texture and staying power. It dulled freckles, disguised blemishes, and gave wearers that prized moonlit sheen. But with each application, it seeped slowly into the skin, absorbed by pores drifting toward the bloodstream like a patient assassin. Some symptoms were subtle at first. Headaches, fatigue, a tinge of nausea that could be blamed on last night's honey wine. Over time, the signs grew darker. Tremors, memory lapses, gum decay. And yet, the powdered face remained flawless. You couldn't see the poison. That was the point. One noblewoman is said to have worn lead makeup every day for 20 years until her teeth turned black and her hair began to fall in ropes. A physician's diary noted her ethereal appearance and the delicate violet hue beneath her eyes, classic signs of lead poisoning. But to her and to her peers, that pallor was the height of grace. Not everyone agreed, of course. Some clerics railed against cosmetic vanity, declaring it deceitful and spiritually corrupt. Others took a more pragmatic view, arguing that powdered skin simply hid the ravages of disease or age, especially in a court full of arranged marriages and public scrutiny. Historians continue to debate how widespread the use of lead makeup really was. Some suggest it was limited to the very rich, the very bold, or the very desperate. Others believe even middle-class women tried diluted versions copying courtly trends with cheaper, equally questionable ingredients. But the records are clear. On one point, the pursuit of beauty didn't pause for poison. Whether on royal portraits or in marriage contracts, that ghostly face persisted as an ideal. Women wore it knowing the risks, or perhaps not knowing them fully, because science had not yet whispered the truth that their vanity might one day eat them from within. Evening deepens, and the flickering light of a beeswax candle dances across a cluttered wooden shelf. Dried rose petals, corked bottles, bits of rust, and what looks suspiciously like a crushed beetle. You're not in a kitchen. You're in a medieval makeup room. Once your face was pale enough to rival marble, it was time to bring it to life with rouge. But not the kind you might imagine. This was no neatly packaged compact with a pleasant floral scent. Instead, you might dab your cheeks with wine dregs, grind a bit of iron rust into oil, or if you had the nerve crush, cochineal beetles into a fine powder and mix them into wax. Color was tricky in medieval beauty. Too much red and you looked indecent. Too little and you looked ill. but just the right shade of pink on the cheeks that signaled virtue, youth, and emotional sensitivity. Blushing, after all, was tied to the soul. One curious belief that persisted was that a natural flush, spontaneous blushing reflected moral purity. A girl who turned pink when complimented was thought to be honest, modest, and emotionally whole, so women faked it. Because even back then, if virtue could be mimicked with makeup, why not? Some recipes for rouge instructed users to gently prick the skin with nettles or scratch the surface just enough to cause a temporary flush. Others relied on crushed red fruits like cherries or pomegranate seeds, though the results didn't always last. For the bold, the beetle extract called carmine was the longest lasting and brightest, though it came at a cost. The smell, the risk of skin irritation, and the unsettling knowledge of its insect origin. You pinch your cheeks, a common trick, but it fades quickly. The lady beside you dips a cloth into a wine rust mixture and daubs it on with expert flair. She does not smile, lest the illusion shift. There is no scholarly consensus on how widespread beetle-based cosmetics were in Europe during the medieval period. Some argue the trade in cochineal pigments only boomed later during contact with the New World. Others suggest earlier uses came through trade routes stretching from North Africa and the Levant. Regardless, something red and vaguely organic was going on. In a Venetian beauty manual from the 14th century, the author warns that too much rouge can awaken suspicion. Yet, in the same breath, he offers a dozen recipes for achieving the glow of virginity, an elusive prized effect that apparently required crushed coral goat's milk and saffron powder, all applied with a bit of cloth soaked in goose fat. Goose fat. Because nothing says innocence like poultry grease and beetle wings. And yet, when the light catches just right and the cheeks flush just so, the transformation feels oddly modern. The desire to enhance, to glow, to seem more alive, it spans centuries. Even if the tools were a bit more crunchy. You glance in the mirror, a flicker of pink, a hint of danger. And suddenly the powdered mask from before feels a little less funereal, a little more human. Across the chamber, a young woman sits perfectly still as another leans in with tweezers carved from bone. One sharp tug, then another. You wince in sympathy, even though your own reflection is already half bare. Gone are your brows plucked until smooth. Gone, too, is the front half of your hairline shaved away to bare your noble, virtuous dome. Yes, welcome to the era of the high forehead. In medieval Europe, especially during the 14th and 15th centuries, a high, rounded forehead was considered a mark of intelligent serenity and moral refinement. A broad brow suggested a spacious mind, ideal for meditation, prayer, or reading moral texts by candlelight. And if your natural hairline didn't agree, you simply removed it. Eyebrow plucking wasn't just grooming, it was a ritual. Eyebrows were considered distracting, even animalistic, especially if thick or expressive. Women used wax threads or sharpened blades to eliminate them entirely. Thin arches weren't enough. The goal was a smooth, blank expanse of pale skin, serene, saintly, slightly strange. And the hairline shaving began just above the natural brow ridge, sometimes as far back as the crown. Pumice stones were rubbed to keep the skin smooth. Some used special alkaline solutions derived from walnut shells or quicklime to slow regrowth. In one preserved manuscript, a noblewoman described her daily singeing as part of her toilette, likely a poetic euphemism for chemically burning off follicles. It wasn't just vanity. This aesthetic had a religious underpinning. Monastic ideals heavily influenced fashion, and a woman who looked like a contemplative nun, blank-faced ethereal, was closer to God, or at least to her husband's idea of what God wanted. Still not all agreed. Some chroniclers mocked the bald-fronted beauties, likening them to boiled eggs or hairless cats. One French poem refers to a noblewoman with a forehead broad enough to host a chessboard. Subtle shade 14th century style. Scholars continue to debate whether this trend began in Italy or spread northward from France. Others argue it was a parallel development across multiple courts fed by an increasingly interconnected elite fashion network. Surviving portraits from England, Bohemia, and the Burgundian Netherlands show a remarkably similar silhouette. High brow, heart-shaped face, blank gaze. You glance again at the vanity tools. The tweezers gleam. A slender blade rests beside a bowl of rosewater. Nearby, a silk kerchief hides a red patch where a hairline used to be. The room smells faintly of vinegar and scorched herbs. Was it beautiful, maybe? Was it painful? Definitely. But for a few precious hours under the right lighting, a woman might look like something from an illuminated manuscript, pure, untouchable, devout. And if it itched, you didn't scratch. If it stung, you endured. Because beauty like penance was supposed to hurt a little. You run a hand over your brow now, strangely cool to the touch. It feels less like skin and more like vellum, an empty page ready for whatever the world decides to inscribe upon it. The candle gutters in its holder as a faint draft brushes your newly bare forehead. Nearby, something shimmers oddly in a silk-wrapped chest. You edge closer. Tucked between velvet scraps and twisted ribbons is a wig long, lustrous, and faintly uncanny. It smells faintly of lavender clove. And something else, something more final. It's said that some medieval wigs were made not from hair carefully snipped and sold, but from the locks of the dead. These weren't just rumors whispered among washerwomen. Chroniclers in plague-struck cities noted a curious trade in hair luxurious, thick, still gleaming, despite the rot it once crowned. Barbers and undertakers, pressed by demand and grief, often shaved the heads of the deceased before burial. Some did so for hygiene, others for profit. Wigs were both fashion and disguise. They allowed noblewomen to reinvent themselves after illness, childbirth, or religious penance. They covered baldness, whether caused by overzealous plucking or the ravages of disease, and the finest wigs. Those were made from hair that no longer had use for a scalp. Of course, no lady would admit her glorious tresses had once adorned a corpse. The wigs were clean, sometimes boiled in wine, scented with herbs brushed with rosemary oil. But the whispers persisted. In Venice, one scandal broke when a bishop reportedly refused communion to a countess whose wig smelled too much like the grave. The truth is hard to pin down. Some scholars suggest the corpse wig tales were more legend than reality, early Gothic horror spun from grief and beauty anxiety. Others argue the trade was real, but quiet, a tolerated offense in desperate times. After all, when half a city lay under plague sheets, who would mind a little recycling? There is no scholarly consensus on the scale of the practice, but inventories from certain cities, Florence, London, Avignon, list quantities of unclaimed hair sold by weight. Some may have come from prisons, convents, or hospitals. Others from plague pits. What remains certain is the uncanny appeal these wigs held. A full head of curls in an era of thinning hair and medieval lice was no small luxury. For court appearances, weddings, and diplomatic receptions, wigs provided not just beauty, but armor. One noblewoman wrote that she felt reborn in her borrowed hair like a ghost pretending to be alive again. You lift the wig, it's heavy, thicker than anything growing naturally in this era. The color is an impossible auburn with glints of gold at the ends. Someone once wore this hair with pride. Then someone else wore it again. And now, it's yours for the evening. There's something quietly rebellious about this ritual adorning oneself in death to feel more alive, and something oddly comforting too. In a world of fleeting youth and fragile bodies, hair outlived the soul. Why let it go to waste? You place the wig gently on your head, The weight presses close like a memory that isn't quite yours. Vanity necromancy, they called it. But tonight it feels more like communion. You tilt your head toward a mirror framed in tarnished bronze. The borrowed curls settle like whispered secrets around your cheeks. But something's missing. You smile and catch sight of your teeth. White mostly. Maybe a little yellowed from honeyed wine. Too modern, too clean. Medieval beauty standards didn't always prize pearly whites. In some regions, darkened or even black teeth were seen as elegant, mysterious, or just preferable to what came naturally. This wasn't universal. In some parts of medieval Europe, particularly among the upper classes, whiteness did dominate dental fashion. But elsewhere, especially in Eastern European and Asian-influenced courts, blackened teeth were admired. They suggested refinement, maturity, and sometimes magic. The methods for achieving this look varied. Charcoal rubbed directly onto enamel was common. Burnt rosemary, powdered cloves, or scorched bone were also used especially for temporary darkening before festivals or feasts. A longer-lasting approach involved a tar-like paste made from iron filings vinegar and herbs applied with a cloth-wrapped finger, then left to sit overnight. You eye a nearby pot filled with such a concoction. It smells like wet metal and overcooked time. Would you dare? In parts of Japan, a practice known as ohaguro involved deliberate blackening of teeth among aristocratic women and samurai families. Some historians believe this trend trickled westward via trade and intrigue, eventually influencing cosmetic choices in border regions and royal courts eager for novelty. Others argue the inspiration came from closer-to-home medical traditions that used ash and herbal smoke to treat toothaches or strengthen gums. In time, the medicinal bled into the aesthetic. There is no scholarly consensus on how far blackened teeth traveled as a fashion, but period descriptions offer tantalizing hints. One Bavarian courtier wrote admiringly of a bohemian lady with a smile like lacquered ebony. Another described a Sicilian bride whose teeth glimmered like ink in moonlight. And while some clerics decried the practice as an affront to God's design, others praised it as a modest alternative to gaudy golden dental caps, which became increasingly popular and increasingly showy in some urban circles. A few daring souls even tried to lighten their teeth deliberately. Recipes involving ground chalk, crushed oyster shell, or even urine, yes, urine, circulated in medieval texts promising a smile like the saints. But these methods were often more myth than medicine and carried their own unpleasant side effects. Still, for many blackened or polished teeth weren't about trends, they were about transformation. Just like powder rouge or wigs from questionable sources, they offered a way to step beyond the body's limits to become something more polished, more prepared. You take the cloth, dip it in the mixture, and press it lightly to your front teeth. The taste is foul, the effect immediate. In the candlelight, your smile now gleams with a strange luster, unnatural, deliberate, proud. It's not pretty, not exactly, but it is powerful. And in a world where women had little control over their lives, choosing how to look, especially when it shocked or puzzled, was its own quiet revolution. Somewhere down the corridor, a court musician strikes a quiet chord on a lute. The scent of something rich and musky drifts past a heady blend of florals and decay. You follow your nose and find yourself in a room hung with velvet and cluttered with gloves. Dozens of them soft as buttered bread and stronger than they appear. Perfume gloves were more than just fashion in medieval and Renaissance courts. They were sensory weapons. The trend began innocently enough. Leather once tanned in pungent brews of dog dung, and lime needed serious olfactory help before it could be worn. Enter perfumers. They soaked gloves in rose oil musk from civets crushed lavender ambergris, scraped from whale intestines, and more. The result gloves that wafted a floral fog with every gesture. But then came the twist. These gloves weren't just charming, they could be dangerous. You slip on a pair resting near a dish of dried violets. The leather creaks softly as your fingers settle in. The smell is pleasant, almost too pleasant. In courts across Europe, rumors swirled of poisoners who use scented gloves as covert delivery systems. A rival's glove might be laced with arsenic oil, belladonna, or powdered hellebore. All it took was a handshake, a brush to the lips, a moment's touch to the eyes. One infamous tale involves Catherine de' Medici's court, where perfume gloves allegedly felled more than one inconvenient noble. While many of these stories verge on legend, they highlight a truth. The line between beauty and danger was often as thin as kid leather. Some scholars argue the panic over poisoned gloves was overblown, a Gothic exaggeration of court paranoia. Others believe small-scale incidents really did occur, perhaps more as threats than actual assassinations. After all, what better way to sow fear than to suggest your very presence was toxic? There's no scholarly consensus on whether perfume gloves were commonly weaponized. But inventories and court records show a startling overlap between apothecaries and perfumers, both dealing in powders, oils, and tinctures that could either beautify or kill depending on the drop. Even without the drama, gloves had layers of meaning. They were given as love tokens worn as status symbols, or used to flirt silently across banquet tables. A scented glove held to the face was more than a gesture. It was theater-intentioned desire. You twirl the glove by one finger, testing its softness, its scent. Somewhere behind you, a door opens and closes. You're not alone, but the gloves are still warm. Someone wore them recently. Someone who wanted to be remembered by smell alone. In a world with no deodorant and limited baths, fragrance was currency. And gloves, those soft, intimate intermediaries, were how you spent it. You raise your hand to your face, inhaling deeply. Beneath the rose is something darker. Not poison, maybe, but power, presence, a trace of someone who understood that to wear beauty on your hands was to wield it in every gesture. The air feels tighter here, warmer, sticky with the scent of beaten egg and something floral left too long in a sunlit dish. A small hand mirror reflects flickers of candlelight as a woman leans in squinting. She's not looking at her reflection. She's watching her face stiffen. Egg whites, whipped, spread thin, and left to dry like lacquer on the skin. The medieval facelift, used widely among noblewomen, especially for court appearances and portraits. Egg whites were one of the few affordable, accessible, and socially acceptable miracle treatments of the day. Smeared across cheeks and foreheads, they tightened the skin, temporarily smoothing wrinkles, lifting drooping features and giving the whole face a dewy, glassy finish. You dip 2 fingers into the bowl. The mixture is cool, sticky, and slightly frothy. As you smear it across your cheekbones, a faint tightening begins almost immediately. A bit uncomfortable, but effective. In dark halls lit by candle or hearth, the sheen from egg whites reflected light in a way that seemed almost magical. Faces glowed like porcelain. One suitor, in a letter to his intended, called her shining, as if kissed by angels, almost certainly a result of this exact beauty trick. But with glow came crackle. The egg film dried fast, forming a fragile mask that flaked with every twitch or laugh. Talking risky. Smiling. Only if you didn't mind sounding like parchment being crushed. There's a story of a Hungarian noblewoman who wore egg whites daily during a month-long festival. By the end, her skin had broken into red welts, and her maids were forbidden from speaking jokes near her, lest her face literally split from smiling. Historians still argue how common this practice really was. Some suggest it was more theatrical than daily reserved for betrothal meetings or painted portraits. Others believe it was a regular part of elite women's routines, like perfume or braiding. No one can quite agree whether the egg whites were purely aesthetic or also had spiritual overtones. Some surviving texts imply that a glowing countenance reflected moral clarity. Others hint at vanity, an attempt to fake youthful purity in a body long past its prime. You catch your reflection again. Your face is tighter now, motionless. You try a smile. It cracks a little. Somewhere between beauty and mummification, you find yourself caught. In one diary from 1431, a court lady described the sensation as being held in soft ice, the face trapped in its finest hour. Another praised the method for creating stillness in the cheeks, which sounded poetic until you realized it meant paralysis. Still among all the medieval beauty tricks, this one feels oddly gentle. No poisons, no beetles, no flaming irons, just eggs. The same ingredient in your breakfast now, weaponized for love. You sit very still, breathing through your nose, waiting for the mask to fully dry. There's a quiet power in stillness, a readiness, even if it lasts only an hour. For that 1 hour you glow. A flick of movement at your wrist catches your eye. It's not fabric, not a shadow, something slower, wetter. A small linen pouch shifts on the table, dark and damp. You open it cautiously. Leeches. Not for medicine, not tonight. Tonight they're for beauty. It's easy to forget in our modern obsession with glow that paleness was once the reigning beauty ideal. Not just pale skin, but bloodless. And when powders and vinegar baths weren't enough, noble women reached for a solution, both literal and living leeches. They were applied to the temples behind the ears, even to the insides of arms, places where skin was thin blood vessels close to the surface. Their job removed just enough blood to induce a soft, translucent pallor. It worked, temporarily. You gently prod one of the leeches with a brush handle. It coils like a ribbon of wet leather, sluggish in the cool room. Another stretches toward your warmth. Beauty through bloodletting wasn't invented in the Middle Ages, but the era refined it. Blood was seen as a humoral excess, something to be balanced especially in women. A flushed face might indicate disorder, even sin. A pale, calm complexion that meant harmony. In some households, leeches were kept in small clay jars, labeled and fed with milk or fresh cuts from livestock. High-status women sometimes had personal jars prepared before holidays, portraits, or court appearances. Leeches were as much a part of the dressing table as combs or rouge. There is no scholarly consensus on how frequent or widespread this beauty practice truly was. Some records mention it casually as routine. Others describe it as unusual or even frowned upon, reserved for extreme vanity or the very highest circles. One 15th century poem mocks a lady whose skin was so pale the moon turned jealous, implying her leeching habit had gone too far. Another tells of a woman who fainted at her own wedding, from too much softening, the euphemism barely hiding its meaning. You roll back your sleeve. The skin at your wrist is tender, marked faintly by where your corset laces pressed earlier. You hesitate. It's not the pain that worries you, it's the intimacy. Letting something drink from you, something silent and ancient, feels like a pact. But beauty is often a bargain. You press the leech gently to your skin. It takes hold with a sensation that's oddly warm, not painful, more like a tugging. Your breath catches. In the mirror, color fades from your cheeks, leaving behind a ghost-pale glow. Your reflection looks older, more timeless, almost holy. Some scholars propose that these acts weren't just about appearance. They were rituals, part penance, part performance. To drain oneself quite literally in the pursuit of grace. Was that vanity or devotion? Outside bells toll faintly in the dark. You sit still, the leech, continuing its quiet work. The world spins, but your skin remains still, calm, pale, ready. And for a moment, you understand what it meant to make your body a canvas, your blood the ink. Steam clings to the stone walls, curling in lazy tendrils around the flickering torches. You've followed the warmth to a small bathing chamber hidden behind a velvet curtain. A noblewoman stands in a tub, waist-deep in milky vinegar water, while a maid briskly scrubs her back with what appears to be a chunk of burnt bread. This is not punishment, it's a spa day. Medieval noblewomen developed elaborate bathing rituals, despite the popular myth that no one bathed in the Middle Ages. They did, but not always for cleanliness. Baths were spiritual, medical, and aesthetic experiences intended to soften the skin, lighten the complexion, and purge the body of visible excesses. The vinegar bath, for example, was believed to firm the flesh and tighten pores. When mixed with herbs like sage lavender or rosemary, it became a multi-sensory experience, tingling, sour, oddly luxurious. For noblewomen with access to perfumed oils and warming stones, these vinegar soaks were a regular indulgence. Then came the bread. Burnt bread ground into rough chunks or ash and mixed with water made for a surprisingly effective exfoliant. The grainy texture lifted dry skin, while the char was believed to absorb impurities. Some even added powdered eggshell or dried rose petals for scent and symbolism. You dip your fingers into the vinegar bath. The water bites just slightly. It smells sharp and herbal, like a salad dressing prepared by a mystic. A wooden tray nearby holds cloths, bone combs, and a bowl of charred crusts from a blackened loaf. You rub one between your hands. It crumbles like chalk. No one agrees on where this practice originated. Some scholars trace vinegar baths to Roman traditions revived during the Carolingian period. Others argue the idea came from Byzantine influences traveling west with perfumes and cosmetics during crusades and merchant voyages. The bread, though, that one's harder to track. Perhaps it was born of necessity, burnt bread, too hard to eat, repurposed as beauty grit. One 13th century manuscript refers to cleansing by the crust, recommending bread rubbed with lemon balm for the neck, the bosom, and the lesser toes. Another claims vinegar calls youth to the skin, a phrase so confidently vague it had to be believed. These rituals weren't just for the body, they were performances. Women bathed while surrounded by attendants, incense, and warm cloths. The goal wasn't just rejuvenation, it was transformation. Emerging from the tub, pale glowing and steeped in rosemary, meant readiness. For court, for marriage, for judgment. You lower yourself into the tub. The vinegar stings, then settles. The steam makes your wig frizz. You laugh silently. The bread in your hand crumbles to paste as you scrub your forearm. The sensation is somewhere between medieval and modern, part ASMR, part penance. There's a serenity here, a kind of preparation not just for display, but for shedding the day. To burn the bread and scrub it back in, to sting yourself beautiful, it's all part of the process. And when you emerge flushed and sharp-smelling, you are one step closer to becoming the ideal you. You pass through a corridor lined with locked cupboards, each faintly humming with mystery. A heavy oak door creaks open to reveal a chamber not meant for public eyes. Shelves sag beneath jars, bundles of dried herbs, and tiny leather-bound books. A mortar and pestle sit mid-spell, coated in pinkish powder. Welcome to the cosmetic apothecary. This is where beauty met alchemy. In the medieval world, apothecaries were more than pharmacists. They were part chemist, part perfumer, part occultist. And many doubled as creators of cosmetics, blending powders, salves, and elixirs, not just for health, but for transformation. Some recipes brightened the skin. Some promised attraction. Others were simply labeled for softening a term that could mean anything from smoothing wrinkles to seduction spells. A folded parchment catches your eye. Its ink is smeared but legible, for the cheek's dragon's blood, lily root, and ash of white rose. Next to it, a sealed jar holds a pale pink dust that shimmers faintly under the lamplight. You open the jar. The smell is floral, earthy, and slightly metallic, like something that might bless you or curse you depending on dosage. Cosmetic powders often came in similar forms to poisons and love potions. The ingredients overlapped belladonna for wide pupils, arsenic for skin, lightning nightshade for glossy eyes. Applied correctly, they enhanced beauty. Applied poorly, or by accident, they blurred the line between cosmetic and killer. One surviving guide warns mix not the pearl ash of Venus with wormwood. It draws madness. Whether this was actual pharmacology or superstition, no one's sure. But the risk, real or imagined, added a thrill to every application. Some scholars suggest these recipes were guarded like family treasures, passed from mother to daughter, lady to maid, whispered in the kitchens and boudoirs. Others argue they were mass-produced and sold in marketplaces alongside spices and remedies. There is no scholarly consensus, but there is plenty of intrigue. Women with access to these recipes held quiet power. One noblewoman, known only through a widow's ledger, spent a year's allowance on powders of affection and elixir for the mouth. Some think she was chasing love. Others suspect she was playing politics, appearing youthful to outlive rivals or win new suitors. Even male apothecaries sometimes dabbled in cosmetics under aliases. The line between beautician and magician was thin. After all, who else could make your skin gleam, your lips blush, and your enemies itch? You test a bit of powder on the back of your hand. It clings like stardust. Nothing burns, but your skin tingles faintly warm. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's imagining. Maybe that's the point. In this room of secrets surrounded by formulas and fumes, you sense how much beauty was about control. To change your scent, your shape, your tone, was to rewrite your role in the world. Alchemy wasn't just for gold, it was for faces too. And as you place the jar back careful, not to spill even a grain, you realize the real magic wasn't in the powder. It was in the act of using it. A pale curtain flutters near a bath chamber window, letting in the scent of clover and livestock. Inside the tub gleams white not from porcelain, but from its contents. Milk. Warmed, steeped with petals, and gently stirred with a carved birch ladle. Milk baths were not born in the Middle Ages. Cleopatra, or at least her legend, claimed the idea first. But European noblewomen embraced the ritual with fervor, eager to replicate what poets called skin-like ivory silk. It was part luxury, part vanity, part spiritual paradox. You dip a toe in. The liquid is creamy, faintly sweet. Someone has added rosewater and a hint of clove. It smells like a nursery crossed with a spice stall. The milk itself, cow, goat, or sometimes even donkey, was believed to nourish the skin, soften the limbs, and quiet the temperaments, a phrase that meant both emotional calm and physical balance. Combined with herbs, it became a full-body potion, equal parts medicine and myth. But as with many indulgences, there were critics. A Dominican friar in 1314 famously declared, "She who bathes in milk too often spoils both her skin and her soul." Another moralist warned that warm milk was a veil for sins of pride. The implication was clear beauty that came too easily must be hiding something. There is no scholarly consensus on whether milk baths were common or reserved for the fabulously wealthy. Some sources describe their use in convents, suggesting medicinal purposes. Others mention them only in the context of high court ladies preparing for weddings or royal ceremonies. One particularly vivid diary tells of a Saxon noblewoman who bathed in buttermilk before her engagement. Her maids reported that the kitchen smelled like sour cheese for a week. Another tale involves a bishop scolding his niece after catching her with 6 pitchers of goat milk and a loofah made from pine needles. You lower yourself in slowly. The milk clings like silk. The bath is silent save for the soft slap of petals against the wooden sides. You feel oddly buoyant, and not just from the liquid. There's a comfort in this moment, absurd as it is, like you're part of a ritual older than soap. Outside the chamber, a servant giggles. The sound is quickly hushed. You're meant to be alone, holy, serene. And yet, here you are, sitting in someone's breakfast. The paradox was part of the appeal. To soak in milk was to claim gentleness in a brutal world. To wrap yourself in warmth while others scrubbed with sand and soap made from ash was to say I am different, not just cleaner, more important. Some women added honey or oats to their bathwater. Others whispered prayers. A few likely did, both unsure which ingredient mattered more. You close your eyes, letting the milk lap against your collarbone. Outside, hooves clop down a distant road. The world carries on, muddy, cold, loud. But here in this bowl of warmth and judgment, you are perfectly still. The next room is darker, its air thick with soot and metal. Small mirrors line the walls, silver-backed cloudy, each angled to catch what little light flickers from the candelabras. You step inside, and immediately your eyes sting. Here the glamour begins where the ash ends. Medieval eye makeup was not merely decorative. It was symbolic, alchemical, and occasionally blinding. The most common eyeliner, soot, scraped from lamps or burned herbs mixed with oil or animal fat, and applied using tiny sticks or feather tips. It darkened the rims of the eyes, added depth, and some claimed protected vision from sun glare and evil spirits alike. You lift a slim, scorched applicator. It's warm from the fire. A woman seated nearby dips hers into a walnut shell filled with gleaming black paste, and with practiced ease drags the tip along her lower lash line. One flick, and the look is transformed, mysterious, bold, just slightly dangerous. But soot was just the beginning. For shimmer and light-catching contrast, some elite women used powdered silver, literally. Thin sheets of silver leaf were crushed into dust, then dabbed onto the lids or brow bones. The effect was dazzling, especially in firelight, where the particles caught flame and reflected it. One observer at a royal wedding described the bride's eyelids as glimmering like wet coins beneath a fog. Naturally, this came with risks. Silver was not meant to enter the eye, nor frankly were many of the ingredients used. Lead-based powders used elsewhere on the face sometimes migrated into eye creams. Some women added crushed pearl or even tiny glass particles to get a more radiant look. That didn't always end well. There is no scholarly consensus on how common these eye treatments were, or whether they were more ceremonial than everyday wear. But accounts from courts in France, Milan, and even parts of Moorish Spain all reference the silver gaze, a term both admired and feared. Worse still were the molds. A peculiar artifact survives in a few museum collections, small bell-shaped clay pieces, hollowed and cooled, said to have been placed over the eyelids after applying cosmetics. They kept the paint in place and allegedly shaped the eyes into an exaggerated almond or doe-eyed form. Wearing them too long could cause swelling. One document cautions remove before the 9th hour lest the vision blur. You hold a mold up to your own eye. It fits oddly well, cool, heavy, and completely opaque. You imagine sitting through an entire styling session like this, blind waiting for the shape to take hold. Beauty through absence. Glamour through darkness. One letter from a lady-in-waiting complains that her mistress went blind in one eye from the glitters of her ambition, surely a poetic reference to silver-based shimmer. Another blames a failed seduction on a melted eyelash caused by smoky liner too close to the flame. You gently remove the mold, blinking against the room's flicker. In the mirror, your eyes now look deeper, darker, almost unreal. You're not just yourself, you're someone seen from across a banquet hall, remembered exaggerated. Not natural, but unforgettable. The air crackles with warmth now warmer than any other chamber so far. A small brazier glows in the corner, and beside it, an iron rod rests on a cradle of coals. You can hear it hiss softly every few seconds like it's breathing. This is where curls are coaxed from fire. Before curling irons came with electric cords and heat settings, they were forged from solid metal, heated in open flame, and applied with caution or not at all. Medieval heat styling was an art form teetering on the edge of danger. For those who dared the reward was shaped tendrils, elegant spirals, and temple curls that framed the face like gilded script. You pick up a rod with a wooden handle. The iron glows faintly orange at the tip. Someone's used it recently. There's a faint scent of scorched rosemary oil and singed hair. To curl your hair in this era, you needed a few things: patience, courage, and usually an assistant. The rod was heated until glowing, then cooled just enough to avoid instant damage. Still, it was a gamble. One wrong move, and your hairstyle became a cautionary tale. Noble women often dampened their hair with rose water, or coated it in animal fat before applying heat. The fat helped protect the strands. In theory. In practice, it sometimes caught fire. One Italian diary mentions a wedding delay due to smoking temples and a hurried rebraid. And yet the look was desirable, especially at court, where every curl was read like a line of poetry. Structured ringlets suggested refinement. Soft waves implied romance. Tight coils hinted at youthful energy. Each style was a kind of punctuation. There's no scholarly consensus on how widespread heat curling truly was. Some evidence points to its popularity among urban elites in France and England. Others believe it was more common in theatrical or ceremonial settings, where appearances mattered more than comfort or scalp integrity. The tools varied. Some rods were straight, others spiral. A few were double-ended for more efficient styling. Manuals from the late 14th century describe techniques for coaxing the coil and training the tendril. One even warns against overuse, noting that too much twist leaves a woman brittle in head and heart. You try a test curl on a lock of borrowed hair from your wig. It sizzles slightly, then holds tight, springy proud. A nearby mirror shows the result, one perfect ringlet defiant in its artificiality. Like many medieval beauty practices, curling wasn't about realism. It was about exaggeration, symbolism, and control. A curl was never just a curl. It was effort, artifice, and tension. One courtier once wrote, "She walked in with steam still rising from her crown, as if heated by the sun itself. Romantic, perhaps. Or just literal. You lift the rod again, watching it cool. There's power in this tool. Fire and hair have never been natural allies, but in this age of appearances, even enemies can be made to dance. You smile, imagining the surprise on faces as you enter a hall, your curls bouncing slightly, your scalp only mildly singed. Beauty is pain. But sometimes, it's also a spark. You follow the scent of crushed petals and something saltier like roasted meat or warmed stone. It leads you to a table covered in pots, tins, and scraps of linen stained pink and red. A delicate brush rests atop a dish of creamy salve. This is where lips were made to speak silently, sweetly, and sometimes shockingly. In medieval courts, lip color was a statement, not loud like modern lipstick ads might suggest, but purposeful. Rose tones implied youth and virtue. Deeper reds whispered seduction, and the ingredients used to make them range from the romantic to the bizarre. You dip a finger into a nearby pot. The mixture smells of roses and fat pig fat, to be exact. A common base for lip salves in the Middle Ages, pig lard held pigments and helped soften the lips. It was mixed with beeswax for structure, then dyed with natural colorants, crushed coral rose petals, mulberries, and sometimes boiled lark's tongue. Yes, lark's tongue. A few recipes claimed the tongue of a lark simmered in wine and mashed into paste helped the lips retain color longer. Whether or not that was true is anyone's guess. Some scholars believe it was symbolic larks were associated with love and mourning songs. Others think it was just another medieval misunderstanding of chemistry. There's no scholarly consensus on how often such animal-based recipes were actually used. Some records suggest they were rare luxury concoctions for royalty or high-ranking courtesans. Others argue they were popular among any woman with access to a kitchen and too much time. One preserved guide from Burgundy lists oil of pressed rabbit ear as a lip moisturizer, while another from Provence simply states red wine, coral, and prayer. That last ingredient appears often in medieval beauty rituals, perhaps indicating both superstition and the desperate hope that one's lips might survive the winter and court politics. You test the salve on your own lips. It's thick but smooth and tastes faintly like candle wax and crushed summer. The tint is subtle but pleasing, barely a flush, like you've just whispered a secret and blushed from the echo. For more dramatic shades, some women used powdered cinnabar or iron oxide, though both could be toxic if absorbed in large amounts. Still, the desire for color often outweighed caution. A Spanish noblewoman once wrote that she bled her lips for lack of rouge, a phrase both poetic and possibly literal. There were social risks too. In certain times and regions, obvious makeup was frowned upon, especially during periods of heightened religious scrutiny. Lip color could be read as vanity, deception, even witchcraft. But that only added to its allure. One French courtier claimed he could judge a woman's ambition by the tint of her lips. Pale pink. She wanted poetry. Crimson. She wanted power. You blot your lips with a linen scrap and check your reflection. The change is slight but striking. It's not about standing out. It's about shaping the space around you, one quiet smile at a time. In this world of murmured prayers and whispered seductions, even the softest lips held weight. You've returned to your own chambers now, the last candle sputtering beside a thick-bound book, its cover faded, its pages soft from use. You run a hand along the edge, fingers catching on the brass clasp. This is it, the source, the manual, not a grimoire, not quite a diary. This medieval cosmetic guide is something stranger, a handwritten collection of recipes, rituals, and warnings. A dangerous beauty manual. It belonged perhaps to a lady's maid or an apothecary's daughter, someone close enough to power to gather secrets, yet not so important they'd be remembered by name. The first page is a list for brightness of the eyes, for calming the cheeks, for seduction before midday. Some entries are simple rosewater tonics, wax salves, perfumes made from crushed lavender and honeycomb. Others grow stranger, to summon softness in the face oil of almond mixed with the breath of a sleeping cat. Is it metaphor mistranslation, or something that made perfect sense at the time? You flip to a page marked by a pressed violet. The ink here is darker, more deliberate. To cause the heart to soften and the mouth to bloom, mix coral dust with clove. Add a drop of blood. Speak no words while applying. Suddenly the line between beauty and spellwork blurs. Many medieval beauty texts read this way, half science, half superstition. They were part of a hidden tradition passed through hands across borders, sometimes under threat. Because altering the body, especially as a woman, was not always seen as innocent. It was vanity. It was manipulation. It was witchcraft. And yet these manuals survived. Some were disguised as medical treatises. Others were bundled with cookbooks or devotional texts tucked between prayers for humility and ointments for toothache. They were copied, embellished, traded in whispers. For every woman who followed them in secret, another likely paid the price for being caught. There is no scholarly consensus on the authors of these books. Some seem written by women, others by male physicians or clerics, with oddly intimate knowledge of the female temperament. One particularly infamous text found in Venice contained both face mask recipes and instructions for poisoning a rival's wine. Its margins were filled with hearts' drawings of eyes, and one cryptic phrase repeated in Latin, forma est potestas, beauty is power. You trace that line now written here too, in slightly trembling script. Beauty is power. You think back over the last hours. Lead dust on skin. Rouge from beetles. Brows plucked bald. Wigs of the dead. Lip salves from coral and lark's tongue. Baths in milk scrubs of ash leeches and curling rods, and eye molds that steal the light. Each practice a risk, a message, a choice. This manual does not promise safety. It promises effect. You close the book slowly. The candle burns low, throwing your shadow against the stone wall. In this final quiet moment, you understand medieval beauty wasn't about looking lovely. It was about asserting control over a body others wanted to claim. And sometimes that meant rewriting the rules in powder and ink. And while women inscribed rebellion in rouge, men etched identity into stubble, a new kind of ritual emerged not in ink, but in razors, oils, and beard-length decrees. The year is 1220. Somewhere in a Saxon village, a town crier is reading aloud the updated grooming statutes. Yes, you heard that right, statutes. In some parts of medieval Europe, how often a man shaved wasn't a private choice, but a civic duty. Beard ordinances weren't just the stuff of noble edicts, they were woven into monastic codes, military manuals, even marriage contracts. Take Charlemagne, for example. The man wore his beard long, not out of laziness, but conviction. His appearance was part propaganda, part piety. In contrast, certain church councils insisted clergy stay clean-shaven, declaring that an unshorn face hinted at vanity, or, worse, heresy. By the 11th century, there were heated theological arguments about what Jesus himself would have approved of beard, or Bear One Bishop famously wrote that shaving the beard was akin to marring the divine portrait, while another insisted that grooming helped suppress sinful pride. So, to be holy, must you shave or never shave? As you might expect, historians still argue about whether these beard-related mandates were truly widespread, or mostly symbolic, inked by zealots with strong opinions and even stronger beards. But the debates didn't stop with clergy. Town barbers, too, had their own curious rituals. In some cities, barbers were expected to report customers who requested too frequent a trim, suspicious behavior, perhaps linked to vanity, seduction, or ambition. Records from 14th century Florence show men fined for being unseemly in facial appearance, which might mean too much beard, or too little. Meanwhile, in more remote villages, superstitions flourished. Some believed shaving on a Friday invited misfortune, while others swore that hair shorn during a full moon would never grow back evenly. In one German folk tale, a barber's apprentice was blamed for a local drought after trimming a priest's beard without the proper incantation. As silly as it might sound, facial hair in the Middle Ages acted as a kind of visual resume. It declared your role, your region, and even your worldview. A Knight Templar's beard might signal discipline and divine mission. A troubadour's might suggest romantic rebellion. And in the bustling markets of Constantinople, men paid extra to have their beards oiled and braided into patterns that mimicked calligraphy signs, not just of style, but scholarship. So, next time you look in the mirror, consider this: your chin might have once been a battleground between heaven hubris and hygiene. And perhaps somewhere a medieval angel is still counting razors in a barber's basin. It begins with a smell, warm pine crushed rose petals, and something musky underneath. Not unpleasant, but strange. You find yourself leaning toward a carved wooden jar on a merchant's shelf drawn in by the scent and shimmer. This is no mere cologne. It's beard wax concocted by candlelight, guarded by family secrets, and believed by some to cure headaches or summon favor from spirits. Medieval beard care was far more alchemical than aesthetic. The wax recipes passed through households weren't just for style. They were treatments, charms, even tiny declarations of allegiance. In the courts of Andalusia, apothecaries blended waxes with deer musk and ambergris, claiming they could calm the nerves and attract compliments from across the courtyard. But a traveling friar might insist a simple balm of beeswax and rosemary was the only righteous path. Historical texts from the 13th and 14th centuries mention at least a dozen combinations, some involving pine resin honey, olive oil, myrrh, and even powdered bone. One particularly odd Flemish recipe called for rendering the fat of a newborn lamb, mixing it with clove and frankincense, and applying it in a figure-8 motion. What did that do exactly? Well, the jury's out. Some believed it preserved youth. Others claimed it prevented nightmares. A peculiar detail emerges in letters exchanged between court barbers in Milan and Avignon, the inclusion of vinegar and ash in some formulations said to give a darker sheen, befitting those of gravitas. In other words, your beard shouldn't just smell noble. It should look like it's read Latin. As for headaches, a Sienese physician swore by mint-infused wax rubbed gently into the chin, except when the moon was waning, of course. During that phase, it was believed mint could reverse its calming effect and cause mad thoughts and fire in the brain. Some scholars remain puzzled by this claim, noting that nearly every herb used in beard waxes carried both medicinal and superstitious baggage. It's unclear where grooming ended and spell work began. But beyond recipes and remedies, beard wax had a tactile significance. A well-waxed beard communicated readiness. You might be heading to court, to confession, or into combat. To appear with a ragged or unruly beard was in some circles akin to wearing yesterday's hose, indecent if not scandalous. In fact, one bishop in Rouen fined his choir boys for smelling of unwaxed disorder. Whether the odor or the metaphor disturbed him more is unclear. Traveling soldiers carried hardened pucks of beard wax wrapped in linen, both to style facial hair and, according to one French captain, to plug a leaking boot. The idea that the same salve could prepare you for both courtship and survival paints a vivid picture of medieval multitasking. So next time you twist your mustache or smooth your beard, remember centuries ago that same gesture might have involved rose oil, sacred geometry, and a spoon carved from bone. And depending on who you asked, it might cure your migraine or invite one. Steam curls around your ankles. The stone floor beneath your feet is warm damp with centuries of use. A flute echoes softly down the tiled corridor, and somewhere nearby, a pair of doves coo from a rooftop coop. You've entered the world of noblemen's bathing, not a quick splash-and-go affair, but a theatrical, almost sacred ritual of water scent and status. In the medieval upper classes, especially across parts of France, Hungary and the Holy Roman Empire, bathing wasn't just about hygiene, it was performance. Imagine tub houses nestled within castles, or adjacent to noble estates where men didn't bathe alone, and certainly not in silence. Servants bustled with pots of heated rainwater steeped in rosemary, juniper berries, or lavender. A bard might be hired to play a lyre beside the tub, and if you were truly extravagant, you brought a bath animal, yes, animal. Trained cats, lapdogs, or even small deer were sometimes led into the bath chamber, perfumed and adorned as status symbols. Contemporary accounts from Burgundian courts describe a marquis who insisted his pet goose wade beside him. It hisses only at dishonor, he claimed. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or an outlier. Some argue the animal companions were symbolic. Others suggest they were simply well-fed props in a power performance. The bath itself was a production. Copper tubs lined with linens trays of candied ginger and spiced wine within reach, and assistants at the ready with bundles of drying cloths. Steam would rise thickly as herbs boiled in the corner cauldrons, scenting the air and disguising more human odors. Men sometimes bathed 2 or 3 at a time, an act that mixed diplomacy with dermatology. Interestingly, while public bathhouses were often viewed with suspicion, thanks to their associations with disease or impropriety, private noble baths were celebrated. Chronicles from 14th century Prague mention a duke who hosted bath councils, where decisions of war and inheritance were discussed mid-soak. These weren't drunken parties, they were calculated displays of intellect, body maintenance, and trust. After all, you can't exactly carry a dagger into a bath. Still, risks remained. Physicians warned against prolonged soaking, especially during certain moon phases, which were thought to thin the blood or unbalance the humors. A physician in Toledo claimed that men who bathe on Thursdays grew melancholic, while another in Paris recommended bathing only during waxing moons for best moral resilience. One curious quirk of noble bathing was the inclusion of musical acts. A scribe from the court of Bohemia described a favorite bath singer who composed verse on the spot, matching rhyme to the sounds of splashing. Some of his lyrics survive flirtatious meandering lines about soap slipping down marble backs. Whether these were taken as poetry or soft scandal remains an open debate. So, if the idea of a medieval man bathing sounds grimy or lonely, think again. In the right household, it could involve rosemary steam-trained geese live music and treaties whispered between pours of cherry cordial. You weren't just clean, you were seen. You'd think a haircut couldn't launch 1,000 debates, but then again, you've never watched monks argue over the geometry of piety. Somewhere in a chilly scriptorium, candle wax dripping beside ink pots, a novice bends his head forward, a blade glints, a circle is shaved into his crown. Thus begins the story of the bowl cut, equal parts fashion, faith and forehead exposure. The style is technically called a tonsure, and it wasn't always round. Different monastic orders developed their own interpretations, some shaving only the top, others creating strange half-moons or even full bald domes. To the devout, it was a symbol of renunciation. To everyone else, it looked a bit like someone lost a bet with geometry. But here's where it gets interesting. This ecclesiastical hairstyle somehow made its way outside the cloister. By the 13th century, young men in certain cities, particularly those near large abbeys, began imitating aspects of the look, not out of religious zeal, but as a kind of rebellious irony. Just imagine a teenage squire showing up to court with a half-circle buzz cut, claiming it was the scholar's style. Contemporary illustrations show a surprising number of non-monks with modified tonsures, partial shaves, eccentric crescents, and even fringes that resembled helmets. Historians remain divided on whether this was admiration, mockery, or mere convenience. Some argue these variations served practical purposes, easier helmet fitting, for example, or cooling during battle. Others suggest it was purely trend-driven, like the medieval version of a mullet. Records from a Welsh bishop's diary describe his horror at seeing town youth wear mock halos as jest. Meanwhile, a fashion manual from Genoa casually includes diagrams for shaping a devotion, fringe a circle crop, meant to look pious without the full monastic commitment. One diagram even includes beard pairings with captions like "for debate" and "for singing verses on balconies." What's most peculiar is that the look never quite settled into one meaning. A monk's tonsure could signify humility and isolation, but the same shape worn just a bit wider might suggest academic ambition or satirical flair. One French troubadour was known for mocking the clergy in verse while wearing a perfectly smooth tonsure at all times. Was he performing reverence or ridicule? Scholars still can't agree. There's also evidence that monastic tonsures inspired unexpected subcultures. In parts of Prague and Krakow, guild apprentices wore partial shaves to mark their training phase. In Venice, boatmen reportedly shaved crescents into their hair as protection charms, believing the exposed scalp would confuse ill winds. Whether practical or performative, the line between monk and mocker grew blurrier by the year. Even in death, the style endured. Tomb effigies of monks often preserve the tonsure with striking detail, suggesting its visual symbolism held power beyond life. And in one odd case from Brittany, a nobleman requested burial in a full tonsure that heaven may better recognize me. Whether heaven honors haircut requests is, of course, an open theological debate. So the next time you spot a modern bowl cut and wince, remember, once upon a time that same silhouette sparked centuries of reverence, rebellion, and razor-wielding ritual. The nose twitches first, then the brow tightens. Something sharp, something herbal, and definitely not natural lingers in the air. You're standing beside a medieval gentleman who has just doused his armpits in vinegar and crushed mint. It's deodorant, technically, but whether it worked is a question still hanging in the air, much like the smell itself. Personal scent was no minor matter in the Middle Ages. Body odor wasn't merely unpleasant, it was suspect. It hinted at moral decay, spiritual unrest, or even possession. Some physicians believed that certain smells signaled internal imbalance, a kind of visible soul sickness. So naturally remedies are invented, sold, tested, and often regretted. Crushed mint was one of the most common treatments. Mixed with vinegar or goat's milk, it was dabbed under the arms and along the chest to temper the fires of the flesh. But mint wasn't the only option. Some men applied powdered lead, believing it would block sweat entirely. Others stuffed lavender buds into armpit pouches sewn into their shirts. It may have worked briefly until the pouches got wet. One bizarre entry in a German apothecary's ledger recommends soaking cloth in ox bile and then rubbing it under the arms. It cures the odor of fear, the note claims. Modern historians raise eyebrows at this, especially since fear itself wasn't seen as a metaphor. It was believed to produce a distinct evil-smelling vapor. Whether ox bile countered that or added to the problem is still debated. And then there were the powders, a mix of chalk charcoal and powdered myrtle leaves packed into tiny leather satchels. Worn under tunics, these sachets had the dual effect of masking scent and staining tunics, leading to the odd fashion of men, wearing darkened underarms on purpose, signaling their use of noble powder. Curiously, some accounts describe men scenting themselves not for others, but to quiet the humors. The idea was that internal imbalances could be soothed by external application of scent. Mint for anger, rose for sorrow, bay leaf for cowardice. The human body, it was believed, was both map and message board. Sense corrected the writing. There's one especially odd tale from a monastery in Lyon. A young monk was said to suffer sudden fits of gloom. The abbey's healer prescribed daily armpit rubs of lemon zest and ashes. After a week, the fits vanished or so, the record claims. Some scholars suggest the fits were depression. Others believe it was social embarrassment caused by odor. Either way, the treatment stuck. But not everyone was on board. A physician writing from Seville in the late 1200s condemned scented remedies as frivolous poisons. He argued that a man's scent is his truth. To cover it, he wrote, was to mask the soul. That didn't stop others from inventing more and more complex mixtures, many of which would now be classified as toxic. So, the next time you dab on deodorant without thinking, consider this: once upon a time that minty tingle might have been a sign of inner unrest or a daring act of medieval self-care. Either way, someone probably judged you for it. A knight stares into a polished piece of horn, squinting as he angles it toward the candle light. He's not studying battle wounds or checking for lice. He's assessing his eyebrows. Are they too proud, too meek, curved like a hawk, or slouched like a serpent? In the medieval world, even the tiniest arch above the eyes spoke volumes about your station, your soul, and your suitability for polite company. Eyebrow grooming was more than a personal preference, it was political. Manuals from 13th century France offered detailed diagrams showing the ideal masculine brow for poets, merchants, soldiers, and clergy. The right arch could suggest nobility, steadiness, or poetic melancholy. The wrong shape. It might imply treachery, lust, or idle thoughts. Monastic scribes noted brow shapes in their records, often as a form of character assessment. One friar in York described a visiting nobleman as bearing brows like a fox, a phrase believed to imply cunning and deceit. Some scholars remain unsure whether this was a common idiom or simply a personal dig. Either way, it stuck. In courts and guild halls, eyebrow shape was occasionally part of grooming contests. Men would trim pluck or comb their brows into favored forms, using tiny fishbone combs or heated rods to tame the brow into honesty. Eyebrow tinting also gained popularity in certain circles. A mixture of coal dust and goose fat created a temporary darkening effect, said to give a noble seriousness to otherwise fair features. One particularly strange recipe from southern Italy advised rubbing ash from olive pits across the brow to invite wisdom and discourage temptation. Whether this worked is debatable. What is clear, though, is that grooming rituals became increasingly specific. In parts of Burgundy, young pages were taught not only how to maintain their master's armor, but how to trim his brows into what was known as the knight's arc, a gentle rise ending in a firm point. In rare cases, eyebrows were even inscribed with subtle symbolic cuts, tiny notches said to represent duels fought or prayers answered. One troubadour claimed his three-brow mark style was a tribute to lost loves. Another insisted his cuts marked victories. Whether anyone else agreed is unknown, but the style certainly got attention. There were, of course, critics. A stern physician writing in Prague declared that men who alter the brow alter the mind. He believed that eyebrow manipulation disrupted the natural flow of thoughts, an early psychological theory in a way. Others argued that natural brows were signs of divine design, and tampering with them invited misfortune. Yet, despite the objections, brow trends persisted. Illuminated manuscripts show saints with gently arched brows, kings with firm straight ones, and villains with downward slashes. Artists knew their audience. The eyebrow was shorthand for character, belief, and power. So, next time you raise a skeptical brow, think of your medieval forebears tweezing by firelight, darkening with soot, and carving tiny odes above their eyes. They weren't just shaping hair. They were shaping how the world saw them. You hear them before you see them, clicking, scraping, whispering along the stone floor like wooden birds. The shoes are absurdly long, curling slightly at the toe, and each step seems to demand a preposterous level of caution. These are poulaines, the fashion-forward footwear of late medieval Europe. And believe it or not, they were one of the era's most popular height hacks. Height, as in many periods of history, carried weight, social, political, even spiritual. A taller man was often assumed to be stronger, more virtuous, closer to heaven. So, naturally, for those not blessed with towering stature, solutions were sought. Enter Paulina's shoes, with exaggerated toes that could stretch well past 12 inches in front of the foot. Ostensibly stylish, but also quite literally uplifting. Crafted from leather, sometimes lined with fur, or velvet poulaines varied in complexity depending on the wearer's status. Nobles might have tips stuffed with moss or curled and embroidered with gold thread. Some even wore toe chains, tiny decorative links attaching the tips of their shoes to their knees to keep them from tripping. Others attached bells which jingled softly with each step, announcing both arrival and arrogance. The longer the toe, the higher the rank, or at least that was the rumor. In some regions, poulains were so pronounced that laws had to be written to limit their length. A 14th century English statute banned any shoe with a tip longer than 2 inches unless the wearer was of noble blood. Of course, enforcement was another matter. Shoemakers got creative, adding hidden inner lifts or flexible extensions that could be folded inward for inspections. Not everyone was impressed. One German bishop declared poulains horns of the devil and insisted they led men into vanity and immorality. Another chronicler described a man whose poulains were so long he had to be helped into his own bed. Some scholars suggest the shoes weren't just impractical, they were deliberately so, signaling that the wearer needn't walk far or fast. Leisure was, after all, a luxury. And the symbolism didn't stop at height. Poulains became part of a larger grooming strategy. Men coordinated their shoe tips with cloak hems, hat feathers, even beard braids. A particularly vain noble in Bruges reportedly matched the curl of his poulains with the twist of his mustache. Was it elegance or eccentricity? The jury's still out. There's also speculation about a secondary meaning, virility. Some poems from the era made cheeky references to toes, that point where men dare not implying that poulains were more than just fashion statements. Others denied this entirely, insisting they were simply about elegance, not innuendo. Historians remain divided on whether poulains were crude jokes or courtly flair. But regardless of interpretation, one thing is certain: when a medieval man entered a hall in towering poulains, all eyes went to his feet. And maybe, just maybe, he stood a little taller for it, even if he couldn't quite make it up the stairs alone. The first thing you notice is the smell, a sharp tang of lime smoke, and something vaguely rotten. You're in the private chamber of a wealthy squire, where a strange paste is being smeared across his cheeks. He grimaces. Not from pain, at least not yet, but from the knowledge of what's coming next. This is no beauty routine. It's a medieval facial peel. Long before spa menus and serums, medieval men dabble in exfoliation, using whatever was within reach. Sometimes that meant lime juice and ground eggshells. Other times ash lye or even fermented pigeon droppings. The results were mixed, the risks considerable. The goal was simple, smoother skin, free of blemishes, signaling both youth and health. In an age where your face acted as your resume, revealing status, temperament, and vitality, maintaining clear skin was more than vanity. It was social currency. A nobleman with scarring or coarse complexion might be overlooked in court or passed over for advantageous marriages. One popular recipe from a 14th century Spanish manuscript called for a combination of ash lime and goat's milk. The mixture was left to ferment, then spread thinly over the face with a goose feather. After drying, it was scraped off with a dull blade. The process reportedly left the skin radiant and tender, though many records also mention redness, blistering, and weeping cheeks. In more rustic settings, men used simpler concoctions, crushed charcoal mixed with ale, or even fine sand stirred into honey. These acted as abrasive scrubs, sometimes applied by bathhouse attendants with cloths or stiff brushes. One particularly enthusiastic physician in Bologna claimed that a weekly peel lightens the mind, clarifies the vision, and sweetens the tongue. Historians are unsure how facial peels might influence tongue sweetness, but it does hint at the interconnected theories of health popular at the time. Not all methods were skin deep. Some exfoliation rituals had spiritual elements. In certain Benedictine monasteries, monks practiced face fasting, applying a mix of vinegar and ash while reciting psalms, believing the burn purged vanity and inner corruption. Was it penance? Was it skincare? Probably both. One strange detail comes from a diary of an English knight who noted that he avoided peels before battle, fearing the sting of sweat on fresh skin. He described a fellow soldier whose peel had gone awry, his cheeks so raw they wept for mercy beneath his helm. Whether this was poetic or literal is anyone's guess, but the phrase weeping cheeks appears in other documents suggesting the phenomenon was well known. There's still debate among scholars about how widespread these treatments were. Were they limited to elites with access to rare ingredients, or more common than we think, passed down through oral tradition and family recipe? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Facial peels may have been both fashion and folklore, equal parts status ritual and superstitious remedy. So the next time you reach for a face mask, imagine doing it with ash lye and no running water. Your skin might glow, or it might scream. But either way, in the medieval world, beauty had a sting to it. The comb glides through thick hair, then stalls caught in a knot that smells faintly of pine and metal. You're standing behind a knight as his squire tends to his mane, gently untangling strands with a brush made from stiff boar bristles. This isn't a moment of vanity. It's preparation for court for combat, or perhaps both. Hair oil and grooming tools played an essential role in the medieval man's ritual of readiness. Clean style hair signaled discipline status, and sometimes divine favor. A knight's braid could show allegiance. A scholar's oiled part might hint at philosophical leanings. And for many, the ritual of grooming wasn't just personal, it was performative. The oils themselves varied. In France and the Iberian Peninsula, men favored blends of olive oil, rosemary, and crushed laurel, sometimes with a touch of vinegar, to ward off lice. In colder northern climates, animal fats were common, especially boar oil, prized for its staying power and masculine scent. Mixed with beeswax, it created a pomade-like consistency that allowed beards and hair to be sculpted, parted, or braided. One account from a Hungarian chronicler mentions a knight whose morning routine involved his squire braiding his beard into 3 sections, each bound with tiny silver rings. He rides into battle with the calm of a groomed lion, the scribe writes. It's unclear whether the grooming provided psychological comfort, or was simply a tactic to avoid beard entanglement in helmets. Some historians argue both. The brushes themselves were often heirlooms, wooden handles carved with family crests or devotional symbols, bristles sourced from boars, badgers, or horses. In elite circles, boar bristle brushes became status items. A nobleman might commission one with ivory inlay, or pay a fortune for a brush blessed by a monk said to specialize in follicular virtue. Whether such blessings improved hair texture remains doubtful, but the demand suggests belief. Among scribes and scholars, grooming was subtler, but still intentional. Records mention men anointing their scalps with mint oil to clear the mind for letters, or brushing their hair precisely 39 times once for each book of the Old Testament. Rituals blurred with superstition, and no one seemed particularly concerned about drawing a line between them. Interestingly, one Sicilian medical text includes a chart showing hair oils tailored to specific temperaments. Choleric men were advised to use lavender and chamomile, melancholic types, clove and myrrh. Phlegmatic personalities were better suited to citrus blends. Whether this was early psychology or elaborate perfumery is still debated, but it speaks to the era's obsession with matching the inner self to the outer scent. As grooming rituals became more complex, so did the expectations. A well-oiled head and neatly brushed beard could influence courtship outcomes or determine respect on a council floor. And while not all men could afford rare oils or carved brushes, even basic grooming carried meaning. To neglect your hair was to risk being labeled lazy slovenly, or worse, godless. So next time you run a comb through your hair, imagine it tipped with boar bristle dipped in rosemary oil and wielded like a quiet weapon in the endless battle for dignity, rank, and readiness. The cloak looks ordinary enough, thick wool good, stitching a hint of embroidery at the hem. But as you lean closer, a soft perfume wafts from its folds crushed thyme, dried rose petals, perhaps even a wisp of marjoram. This is no accident. You've stumbled upon a perfume cloak, one of the most curious grooming innovations of medieval knighthood. The idea was simple: scent your garments, so they mask the unavoidably human odors of long campaigns. But beneath that practicality lay layers of belief, superstition, and social code. For some, these aromatic cloaks served as subtle signals of refinement. For others, they were talismans, barriers against illness, evil, or even demons. Recipes for perfume linings varied by region and purpose. In France, knights often lined their traveling cloaks with sachets of lavender and wormwood. In Italy, basil and sage were preferred. English nobles favored blends of rose clove and musk. These herbs and flowers were sewn into small pouches and stitched discreetly along the inner seams. When warmed by the body, they released their scent, gradually turning the cloak into a moving diffuser. Some of these scents were more than just pleasant. Medieval medical theory held that smell influenced health, bad air, caused disease, good air, restored balance. So a scented cloak might not only delight the senses, but ward off plague, melancholy, or fatigue. One apothecary from Cologne claimed his cinnamon-rubbed hem could prevent nosebleeds during battle. Modern scholars raise eyebrows at this, though they concede cinnamon does have mild antiseptic properties. Curiously, not all perfume cloaks were fragrant. Some were symbolic. A knight might wear a cloak lined with juniper needles, not for their smell, but because they were believed to confuse demons. Stories circulated of evil spirits unable to follow the scent trail through herbal layers. A particularly anxious nobleman in Bohemia reportedly had his cloak infused with 27 different herbs, including one so pungent that even his squire refused to walk behind him. Monks, too, adopted the practice, though more discreetly. Records from a Benedictine priory note cloaks hung over burning sage before processions believed to purify the fabric of worldly attachments. Was it deodorant, spiritual shield? Probably both. Some historians argue the phenomenon was less widespread than records suggest, limited to wealthy knights and ecclesiastical elites. Others believe it was common, just unremarked upon, like brushing teeth today. Surviving garments are rare, but written mentions abound, often in offhand ways. He entered his cloak rustling with thyme, or the Duke's train bore the scent of late summer. One letter from a lady to her betrothed includes a curious postscript. Do not wear the sage again. It reminds me too much of the apothecary's cellar. Romance, it seems, had its own olfactory boundaries. So next time you reach for a clean hoodie or a spritz of cologne, imagine layering your clothes with herbs for a 2-week ride through damp forests and smoky halls. You weren't just hiding sweat you were wearing. Your fears, hopes, and faith sewn quietly into the lining. You see a flash of dark pigment, not on parchment or a tapestry, but on the eyelids of a man sharpening his sword. His gaze is intense, lined with kohl, not vanity, not costume. This is war paint medieval-style eyeliner, worn not to dazzle, but to defend, intimidate, and perhaps to see. In certain regions and periods, eyeliner wasn't confined to queens or dancers. Men, especially those who traveled, traded, or fought across the Mediterranean and Middle East, used it too. Known in many places as kohl, this dark powder was made from ground minerals like galena soot or antimony, and applied with slender sticks of bone or wood. And it wasn't always decorative. Medical texts from the 12th century describe kohl as a vision aid, protecting the eyes from glare, sand, and infection. Crusaders returning from the Levant reported that desert fighters lined their eyes to avoid the sun's blinding light. Some took up the habit themselves. One knight wrote of the Eastern gift that hardens sight and softens fear. But eyeliner also carried meaning on the battlefield. Certain warrior clans believed it granted spiritual focus. In Andalusia, soldiers marked their eyes before battle in complex patterns, dots, lines, arcs, each with a specific intent. One pattern, known as the falcon's eye, was believed to grant clarity and courage. Whether it worked or simply looked fearsome is anyone's guess, but reports describe enemies faltering when faced with a line of men, eyes dark and gleaming beneath their helms. Some scholars argue these rituals were symbolic, meant to focus the mind or display unity. Others suggest they were practical dust shields, camouflage, or even ways to send silent signals. Accounts from traders along the Silk Roads mention coded markings. A dot on the right lid meant hold position, a diagonal slash meant flank left. There's little consensus, but the idea of eyeliner as language is a tantalizing one. Back in Europe, the practice remained more fringe, often misunderstood. A Venetian merchant was once fined for eyelid sorcery, accused of using eyeliner to bewitch customers. In England, a bishop condemned men who smudged the eye with coal and lust, seeing the act as dangerously theatrical. Yet even there, it found quiet adherence, especially among poets and actors who played at the edge of society's rules. One poem penned by a Breton noble during a siege ends with the line, "Black-ringed eyes see clearer through fire." Scholars debate whether this was literal or metaphor, but either way, the association between eyelining and mental sharpness endured. Interestingly, monks sometimes employed similar practices not for battle, but for night reading. Some rubbed charcoal under the eyes to pull the light inward, claiming it eased strain during midnight vigils. Practical, perhaps. Symbolic, absolutely. In a world lit only by flame, any advantage real or imagined mattered. So next time you swipe on eyeliner for drama or style, remember once it was armor, a shield of pigment, a message without words, and maybe a way to stare into danger and not blink. The curl springs back like a question mark. A nobleman frowns, adjusting a wooden roller pinned awkwardly above his ear. He's slept like this, half upright, barely moving, just to get the right bounce in his fringe. Welcome to the world of male wigs and false curls, a realm where image trumped sleep and gravity was politely asked to step aside. While wigs are often associated with the powdered courts of the 17th and 18th centuries, their roots go much further back. In late medieval and early Renaissance Europe, fashionable men, especially those in urban centers, used wigs, hairpieces, or curling implements to shape their public personas. Think more discreet flair than full theatrical drama, curled locks peeking from under hats or plump ringlets framing a heroic jaw. The tools were rudimentary but effective. Small rollers carved from wood or bone, heated in embers and wrapped in damp linen, served to coax natural hair into waves. For those lacking in volume or patience, partial wigs known as cresties or false locks could be pinned beneath caps or stitched into coifs. These additions were especially popular among aging courtiers, who might be reluctant to show thinning hair in the halls of power. One curious detail from a Florentine tailor's manual offers guidance on stitching curls into a cap, placed near the temple for laughter toward the crown for command. It's unclear whether this was fashion advice or a medieval attempt at hair psychology. Some historians suggest curl placement may have subtly signaled a man's temperament or ambition, though evidence is fragmentary at best. Fashion, of course, breeds backlash. In 15th century London, a city decree fined men for frivolous falseness in hair and brow. The law, which lumped fake curls in with painted cheeks and over-wide sleeves, was aimed at what officials saw as effeminate excess. Some scholars argue the ruling had more to do with class anxiety men of modest means adopting noble styles than with gender norms. Still, the trend persisted. A merchant in Bruges reportedly wore a curled wig dyed to match the velvet of his doublet. A German scribe composed love poems about a man whose curls framed his smile like armor frames the night. And in Paris, one barber offered the lion's mane a custom wig, said to add both gravitas and a hint of wildness. Even among warriors, there is evidence of styling. A chronicler of the Burgundian Wars mentions a commander whose curled sideburns were set in place with resin and virtue. Whether virtue meant patience or prayer is unclear, but the idea of a knight primping before battle is both amusing and oddly relatable. There's ongoing debate among scholars about how widespread wig use really was. Some believe it was limited to theatrical circles and courts. Others argue it was more common among wealthy merchants, diplomats, and even clergy, anyone for whom appearances mattered. So, if you ever feel ridiculous adjusting your hair before a Zoom call, imagine trying to sleep upright with wooden rollers. Also, you could stride into the court looking commanding. In the medieval world, even a curl could carry weight. The powder tastes like mint, but also like regret. You watch a man at court dip a tiny ivory spoon into a bone-carved box, lift the contents to his mouth, and begin to scrub his teeth with his fingertip. He smiles at the lady across the room, his grin gleaming faintly gray. Welcome to the medieval art of tooth powder. Toothpaste as we know it didn't exist. But dental hygiene wasn't ignored. Medieval men, especially those of high rank, were expected to maintain clean, presentable teeth, at least for public occasions. The solution tooth powders made from the era's finest and strangest ingredients. Common mixtures included bone ash, ground oyster shell, burnt rosemary, mint leaves, and salt. Some added crushed pearls for brightness. Others favored powdered charcoal for its supposed cleansing heat. A 14th century Polish manual recommends brushing with dried mouse skulls for strength and polish. Whether this was symbolic or genuinely believed remains thankfully uncertain. Mint was a favorite both for flavor and its association with romance. Courtly love manuals suggested chewing mint before serenading a lady, lest your breath undo your verses. This led to a short-lived scandal in Avignon, where one bishop banned mint entirely from clerical residences, claiming it stirred impure thoughts and over-fragrant confessions. Historians remain divided on whether this was personal paranoia or widespread concern. In the courts of Milan and Paris, powdered bone ash was the gold standard, burnt sifted, and sometimes mixed with dried citrus peel for extra shine. Men carried their powders in ornate boxes, often worn on belts or hidden in sleeves. These kits included miniature brushes made from hedgehog bristles or bundled linen threads wound tight for better grip. Ritual brushing might happen after meals or before diplomatic meetings, not for daily hygiene, but for impression management. A curious custom emerged in certain Venetian salons where men competed in smile duels. Participants displayed their teeth and recited verse while maintaining their widest grin. The winner was often judged by audience applause or in higher circles by a lady's favor. A contemporary poet wrote, "His teeth a scroll of white vellum, unmarred by meat or misdeed." Whether poetic exaggeration or literal dental admiration, the importance of oral grooming was clear. Tooth powder recipes weren't always gentle. Some included brick dust or crushed pottery, both highly abrasive. One Flemish physician warned against powders that flay the gum like boiled onions, yet his own recipe involved powdered coral and sour wine. There is no scholarly consensus on how effective or damaging these powders were long-term, but judging by the number of surviving dental tools in museum collections, they were definitely used. Interestingly, Monks often had their own recipes which avoided mint and included licorice root and myrrh, believed to purify the breath without inflaming the senses. One abbot even claimed he could identify liars by their scentless mouths. They hide both truth and odor. So next time you reach for your toothbrush, consider this. Once clean teeth required oyster shells, dead rodents, or a flirtation ban. And a polished smile might just win you applause or absolution. The man sits near the hearth, gently scraping his fingernails with a piece of stale bread. He's not preparing to eat, he's grooming, and not for vanity either. In the medieval world, clean nails said something about who you were, what you did, and perhaps most tellingly, what you didn't do. Nail care might seem like a minor detail, but in the social geometry of the Middle Ages, it spoke volumes. Long nails, clean and rounded, could indicate literacy, leisure, or even divine favor. Dirty nails, a sign of hard labor, indifference, or deceit. Different regions had different interpretations. In parts of northern Italy, ink-stained fingertips and neatly filed nails were associated with scholars and clerks, men of letters. A clean left hand was especially prized as it held the parchment while the right hand wrote. Some monastic texts warned of the cursed left nail, believed to indicate sloth if left jagged or uncleaned. Manual workers, by contrast, often let practicality rule. Their nails were short, broken, or stained with earth or dye. But even among the laboring classes, certain professions maintained distinct grooming rituals. Bakers cleaned their nails with flour paste. Tailors used thread spools to smooth their nail beds. And among blacksmiths, it was common to rub soot into the fingers, deliberately, both to cover imperfections and to show pride in their craft. There's one especially curious detail from a 13th century Parisian court record. A nobleman accused of espionage was partially identified by the condition of his nails. Too clean for a farmer, too coarse for a courtier, the note reads. Whether this observation helped prove guilt is unclear, but it suggests nails are read almost like handwriting clues to a man's true story. Grooming tools varied. Wealthier men used small ivory scrapers, often part of multi-tool kits that included ear scoops and toothpicks. Poorer folks relied on whatever was handy bits of bone-woven straw or crumbs of stale bread, which doubled as absorbent scrubbers. One English guidebook meant for traveling merchants recommends a quick rub of fingernails with damp wool and ash before entering a city hall. The implication, clean nails earned you a better hearing. But as with many grooming habits, nail care wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Monks often trimmed their nails during specific liturgical seasons, seeing the act as a metaphor for spiritual pruning. A particularly poetic abbot wrote, "The nail overgrows the flesh, as pride overshadows virtue. Both must be clipped in season." There's also evidence of fashion bleeding into function. In the Burgundian court, some men painted their nails with a pale wax polish to appear more refined. A visiting emissary from Hungary reportedly caused a stir by arriving with fingernails shaped like miniature shields, and homage to his lineage, he claimed. Whether admired or mocked, the effect was unforgettable. So, the next time you absent-mindedly clean your nails, know this once. That gesture might have declared your rank, your job, your piety, or your guilt. In a world of dirty boots and soot-streaked faces, a clean fingernail was a quiet declaration of who you were. The chair creaks, but not from age. It groans under the weight of secrets. You're in the barber shop of a medieval town tucked between the fishmonger and the apothecary, where the man holding the razor is more than just a groomer. He's part stylist, part surgeon, part therapist. And his chair. That's where reputations are reshaped and rumors are trimmed as closely as beards. The barber-surgeon was a fixture of medieval daily life. With no strict divide between medical and cosmetic services, he cut hair-drained abscesses, pulled teeth, Lanced boils, trimmed nails, stitched wounds, and yes, gossiped endlessly. In many communities, he was the first to know if a marriage was on the rocks, if a rival was plotting mischief, or if the bishop's niece had been seen leaving the wrong house after dark. Tools hung from every hook in the shop, shears, razors, cups for bloodletting, and strange little clamps for pulling teeth. Some barbers added flare-engraved scissors, dyed capes, mirrors bordered with saintly scenes. But it wasn't the decor that drew clients. It was the atmosphere, a strange blend of vulnerability and bravado, where a man could confess while getting a wart frozen off. Barber chairs weren't chairs in the modern sense. They were sturdy stools or reclined planks sometimes fitted with slanted headrests. One English town record refers to a gossip chair, not officially named but known to all. It was reserved for regulars men who came as much to listen as to be shaved. Some patrons brought gifts honey news from another village, or scraps of court gossip meant to be whispered, while the blade grazed the jaw. Interestingly, the barbershop often acted as a sort of informal town hall. Before public announcements, or after churchmen would gather there to speculate and interpret. If someone returned from a pilgrimage early, or if a merchant suddenly shut his stall, the barber's chair became the stage for decoding motives. And the barber, he was the narrator. One traveling barber in Prague kept a mirror book, a slim journal tucked beneath his razors, where he wrote down overheard secrets and code. It was discovered years after his death, filled with tantalizing entries like, "The widow's son rides west, not east," and 2 buttons missing on the tailor's coat, why scholars still debate whether it was political intel or simply a bored man's entertainment. Of course, the barber's dual role came with risks. If a shave went wrong or a secret leaked, the consequences could be serious. There are records of barber surgeons being punished for treason, blasphemy, and, in one strange case, excessive familiarity with noble nostrils. Yet, for all the potential danger, the position endured. People needed cuts. People needed conversation. There's no scholarly consensus on whether the gossip chair evolved into modern barbershop culture or faded entirely. But the blend of blade and banter is a tradition that echoes still. Even today, a haircut can become a confession. So the next time you settle into a barber's chair, consider this. Once it was a place where war wounds were stitched, reputations made or broken, and whispered truths carried on the scent of rosemary water. And now, as the candlelight of our story fades, you find yourself drifting through a world of waxed beards, scented cloaks, and whispered barbershop secrets. You've strolled the steaming bath chambers of nobles ducked into monkish haircut rituals, and watched a knight have his mustache braided before battle, all in the name of medieval grooming. Strange, isn't it? How something as simple as trimming a brow or polishing a nail once carried the weight of sin, status, or superstition. Let that image linger a quiet village square at dusk, a barber's blade glinting in the last light, a merchant smoothing his curls with boar oil. Somewhere, a knight stoops to tie a poulon while the scent of dried thyme drifts from his cloak. Even in a world of crusades and plagues, there was always time for a little self-care. So, rest easy now. The scissors are sheathed, the gossip chair empty, and the bowl cuts trimmed to divine precision. You've made it to the end with all your fingers, and perhaps a newfound appreciation for eyebrow arches and pigeon-dropping facials. If you'd like to return to strange little tales like these, you can always subscribe quietly, of course. But before you drift off, tell me, where are you? What time is it, and which forgotten ritual or odd invention would you like us to explore next?